Fate Be Changed, Chapter 19, Merida. Merida sat at the edge of the thin, straw-filled mattress in the tiny room she had been assigned. There were no windows in the servants' quarters, so she could not tell if the sun had begun its morning ascent. She could only hope it had. Merida tucked in the hair at her ears and tightened the cloth wrapped around her head, securing it with a pin Eleanor had given her. She held her hands out in front of her face. More black hairs. She had plucked them before going to sleep the night before, and new ones had already popped up. She ran her thumb along her jaw and sighed at the feel of more stubble. But she could not worry about the few stray hairs. She had more important matters to attend to. She needed answers, and she was sure Freya was the only person who could be able to provide them. At least Merida hoped Freya had answers to the myriad of questions that had begun swirling in her head the moment she learned of Princess Eleanor's impending betrothal. It had been hours since dinner, yet Merida was still overwhelmed with shock and disbelief at all the times her parents had retold the story of their meeting and eventual marriage. Not once had either mentioned that her mother had been betrothed to someone from another clan. The past night was the first Merida had even heard of Clan Fraser, yet her own mother had been promised to the chieftain's eldest son? And what about the competition? Why was no one competing for the princess's hand in marriage at the Highland Games? It would appear that the long-standing tradition Queen Eleanor continually harped on had not a very long history at all. Had her mother been promised on that fated day when she found Fergus injured in the woods? She must have been. So how had their union come to pass? Freya would know the answer. She had to. Merida retrieved her bow and arrows from their hiding spot under the bed. She lifted the straps over her head and across her chest, then pulled her kirtle over it all. If anyone looked too closely, they would notice the lumps, but Merida was determined to once again make it off the castle grounds undetected. As she approached her bedroom door, she took a moment to close her eyes and sucked in several deep, calming breaths. She would not allow nerves to get the better of her, not with an undertaking as important as this one. Once she was certain she could walk without her legs shaking, she said a short prayer and pushed the door open. Merida looked up and down the narrow corridor, grateful to find it deserted in this early hour. The only light came courtesy of a lone candle that burned halfway down the hallway. Despite its emptiness, Merida proceeded with caution as she slipped out of the room and gently closed the door behind her. She was not certain of the hour, but it was close to sunup, which she hoped it was. Then the servants in charge of readying the staff for a long day of running the household would be out and about soon. She kept her back close to the wall to avoid the candle casting her shadow. She would not be too careful, especially if someone like Eileen or one of the other maids who were becoming suspicious of her happened to enter the corridor. Her heart pounded furiously, slamming against the walls of her chest with each step. Merida did not breathe easily until she reached the short stairwell that would take her to the rear yard. But she knew better than to let her guard down. Making it out of the castle was only the beginning. She had to get across the yard to the stables and to Angus. She had considered walking to the village before Freya and her mother's wood-carving shop was located, but it was at least half a day's journey to make it to and from the village on foot. Angus would get her there and back within an hour, provided she did not get lost. Merida slipped out of the rear door and crouched low, grateful for the light fog that hung in the air. Combined with the pre-dawn darkness, it helped provide her cover as she scrambled across the yard toward the stables. She knew she would curse that same fog if it slowed her down once she got Angus past the curtain wall, but that was a problem she would face if it came to pass. She spotted Angus in a stall near the front of the stables. Merida looked around for the groom and saw the young boy, Ewan, sleeping against the outer wall. His head was thrown back and his mouth was wide open. Merida crept along the side as if not to startle Angus. She prayed the horse would not neigh upon seeing her. Her horse was smarter than she gave him credit for. It was as if he sensed her needing for stealth. He tipped his head in greeting, but remained quiet. Merida caught him by the reins and as soundlessly as possible walked Angus out of the stable. The remainder of her escape from the castle grounds went smoothly, and she soon found herself traveling swiftly through the woods. Her apprehension began to abate as she made her way to the village, but her anxiety quickly spiked again at the thought of everything that could go wrong. She would talk to Freya. Freya would know what to do. Merida rode past the large downed tree that she remembered from her previous visit. A few minutes later, she brought Angus to a quick stop. Merida spotted a short figure dressed in a cloak and carrying a basket. Freya. She dismounted Angus and tied the reins around a slim tree trunk. As she got closer to the woman, she saw that her basket was filled with an assortment of mushrooms and vegetation. Merida dismissed pleasantries and got right to the heart of the matter. "Why did you not tell me the princess was betrothed?" she asked. Freya swung around. "Oh, Merida, I did not see you there. Did you not think it worth mentioning that Princess Eleanor is promised to some lad from Clan Fraser?" "Is she?" Freya nodded and frowned, then nodded. "Well, that would make sense. Clan Fraser's chieftain is the McCameron's closest ally. Everyone knows that." "I did not." Freya shrugged. "Now you do." "Freya!" Merida screeched. "What does this mean?" The witch picked up a fat mushroom and examined it from all edges. "Well, one is promised. It means that they are to be married in the near future. Although I do not think the princess's betrothal will be formally announced before the solstice. In the last few years, betrothal announcements have taken place at the Highland Games. Something of a grand opening of the games," she said, waving her hands with a flourish. "I know what being promised means," Merida said. "I want to know what it means for Eleanor and my father meeting and getting married." Freya finally stopped her foraging and turned to give Merida her full attention. "I would assume that if your mother were to marry into Clan Fraser, then she would not be allowed to marry your father." "You assume?" Merida began to pace back and forth, crunching the leaves that had fallen to the forest floor. She rubbed at her arms, which had started to itch again. "Does this mean that you do not know what will happen? Are you guessing just as I am?" "I cannot predict the future, Merida." "Yet you can change it," she accused. "No, I cannot. What will it take for you to understand that I have limited control over what happens, and why are you scratching your skin so?" "Because it itches," Merida said. She pushed up the sleeves of her kirtle and held out her arms. She blinked several times at the sight. Her arms were as hairy as her father's. Freya set the basket on the ground and edged closer to Merida. She grabbed her hands and twisted Merida's arms back and forth. "Have you always been this woolly?" Freya asked. "No," Merida said, jerking her arms out of the witch's grip. "Do you think I am a sheep?" She ran her hands over the bristly strands. "I am not sure what is happening. The hair started popping up on my knuckles and along my jaw. I think I might have brushed against a poisonous shrub." Freya continued to stare at her arms for several more minutes before lifting her eyes up to meet Merida's. "I do not think a poisoned shrub would cause this," she said. Freya reached into a dark brown satchel that was the same color as her cloak and retrieved the bound book she had referenced a few days before. Finding a seat on a downed tree, she opened the book and on her lap and began poring over the pages. The woman's distress caused a sense of trepidation to bubble up in Merida's stomach. "What is it?" Merida asked. Freya looked up from the book. Merida wasn't sure what to make of the regretful look in her eyes. She pointed to the tattered linen pages. "I think I may have found the spell I created for your mother," she said. "Finally!" Merida said with a relieved laugh. Now that they knew the spell, they could figure out a way to reverse it. "Why do you look so alarmed?" Merida asked. "Is this a good thing?" "No." Freya shook her head. "No, Merida, it is not."